thank you so much for coming in to speak to us. And let me, first of all, say welcome to the UK.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Must be so good to be back.
Great to be here. Great to be here.
So you come out the airport, and then you're walking through down the escalators, and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm back in the UK. But you had a slightly different experience.
Yeah, it started on the plane. The plane landed, and you know the way usually when a plane lands, like as soon as it breaks, everyone's on their feet. Well, people started standing up, and they were told to sit back down in their chairs, you know. And I was looking at them thinking, oh, I wonder what's going on. It must be a terrorist on board or something.
Why is everyone looking at me?
Yeah. Well, no one. But then they said my name, and I immediately kind of guessed what was going on. I got all my stuff in front of these confused Arizonian people, and I had to get off in front of all of them. So that was a great welcome to the freedoms in the UK for them. And when I stepped off the plane, there were 3 policemen on one side, 2 on the other, just flanking the doorway. And as soon as I saw them, I said, don't tell me trans activists sent you, you know? And they just, I mean, I have to say, the policemen who picked me up were really decent, you know? They brought me to a quiet area where I wouldn't be embarrassed, and they told me I was under arrest. But because I was just so disgusted that I went nuts. I was absolutely infuriated. I said, do you know how you look to America? Do you know what America thinks of Britain at the moment? And, you know, it's nothing to do with them. They don't care. They're not making the rules. So finally, I mean, I was so incandescent with anger. They did talk about putting cuffs on me. So he said, please just let me calm down. You're not bringing me through an airport in cuffs for defending women's rights. And they went off and they discussed it, and they agreed to bring a van around the back. And I went down, and I thought, oh, okay, that's not so bad. But then they opened the back of it, and I had to sit in a little tiny cell in the back, like that's like, you know, that. And I just went, and they could see how shocked I was by it all. So when I was sitting in that little cell, they said, do you want us to open the door? And they opened the door so I could stick my legs out the thing. So then they brought me to Heathrow police station. And again, the guy who was signing me in couldn't get the smile off his face because he was delighted to meet the writer, Father Ted. And I got on really well with everybody, and it was all very polite. And then I was brought to a cell, and I sort of couldn't believe it. I thought it was going to continue like that, with me sitting around and waiting to be interviewed, and then, but no, I mean, this has happened to a lot of women I know in the fight. The process is the punishment. And I think that the UK police thought, let's frighten them into shutting up. And so they decided to, I don't know, engage in a form of light torture, you know, as any time without my phone is to me. But they you know, they kind of, I just sat there and twiddled my thumbs for a few hours. Luckily, I fell asleep, so that killed some time. But it took about 10 hours to get my interview. They said they did come by and felt it wasn't proportionate to wake me up, but I still think it was deliberate to keep me waiting that long.
Yeah. And then they got you in the interview. Was it it's different policemen, I imagine, at that point?
Yes, the policeman was you know, he as with all the police in this country, he hadn't a clue what was going on. You know, he was asking me about trans people. I said, what do you mean by trans people? And he said, people who feel their gender is a different blah, 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 all this, the usual guff.
And they say assigned at birth.
Assigned at birth. He said assigned at birth. And of course, that's activist language, because our sex is not assigned at birth. It's observed and recorded in utero. So these police have been, you know, have had their brains warped by 10 years of Stonewall advice that misrepresented the Equality Act, you know? And even with the recent Supreme Court ruling, they're still acting as if Stonewall rules apply, you know? So after a while, I just resigned myself to it. It was boring and exhausting, and you know, then it turned potentially fatal, because they checked my my pulse, and it was 200, which apparently is extremely high. I don't really, and all those numbers, I never know what they mean.
200 sounds high.
200 is high, and I was like, and the guy was so astonished by my heart rate that he had to do it manually to make sure it was right. And they said he has to go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital, and again, all the policemen were very nice. The hospital staff were lovely, of course. But I had to just stay and until 8 a.m. the next morning. So I'd been in custody and then the hospital for about, I don't know, whatever it was, 16 hours, something like that. So yeah.
There's a photo of you standing in the hospital. I mean, you must have been utterly shattered at that point, and you had a thing in your arm.
I wrote the piece, and
you'd been banned from going online.
Yes,
on X.
On X, but not my Substack. Yeah. And I couldn't believe it, but they gave me all my devices back. So even as exhausted as I was, I just went and I sat down, I wrote the piece detailing everything that happened and got it out at around 6, 7 a.m., 8 a.m., something like that. So, that's kind of, then I went to the nearby Sheraton Hotel.
So just go back
sure.
just a little bit. Whilst you were being interviewed, did they give you any specific explanation? Because when you wrote your Substack, you mentioned a couple of tweets that they'd identified.
Oh yeah, there's 3 tweets. The first one, I mean, believe me, I'm not proud of the tweets. They're not and not because I disagree with them, but because they're not my funniest.
That's the worst. That's the worst is when that gets identified.
And then the one that was kind of like, the first one they told me about was I guess what you could call the violent one, where I said, if a man is in a female-only space, or a trans-identified male, I said, is in a female-only space, he is committing a violent, abusive act. Make a scene, I think I said, call the police, and if all else fails, kick him in the balls, and so, then, I mean, the joke, there's 2 jokes in that. Oh no, punch him in the balls. There were 2 jokes in that. The first was the idea that women and men is a height difference, so it might be easier for women to punch a bloke in the balls than it is for a man. Second was the idea of, punching any woman in the balls is clearly absurd, but yet that's the reality that UK police and the UK government is trying to enforce on people, even after the Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah, if anything, there's even a third thing, which is that the idea that they would complain, they would call the police who wouldn't do anything necessarily, and this is what they would then be having to resort to.
Yeah. I mean, someone asked today, would I have gotten into trouble if the tweet was aimed at actual women? And I have to, I probably would have gotten into trouble, but only because I would have been mass reported by TRAs. But these TRAs, which means trans rights activists, they send death threats, rape threats, 24/7, and the police do nothing about them. And the reason they do nothing about them is they don't understand the issue, and they've been lied to by Stonewall about the Nature and Equality Act.
Keir Starmer, and he stood with JD Vance and he was asked about free speech in this country, and he gave a nice little speech about the tradition that we have here, and this is the home of free speech.
Yes.
And yet a few weeks later, we see you being arrested for putting a couple of posts out there. Now, some people may agree with those, the sentiment of the post. Some people may think they're a bit harsh. They're not illegal, or they shouldn't be illegal in a free speech country.
As I say, the police arrested me for those tweets, but they have never arrested it. And I think this is true to say. I could be wrong. There might be something out there somewhere. But to my knowledge, they have never arrested a trans activist for tweets sent to feminists, So, I mean, I know it's a cliche by now, two-tier policing, but that is exactly what it is.
And the response has... obviously, what's happened to you is horrible. And Tuesday morning, I think it was, like waking up, everybody messaging each other, pretty much as soon as you put out your Substack.
Yeah, I've never had such a reaction.
And sort of universal condemnation, and on front pages of the British newspapers, and also big news in America as well. America seems to be quite focused on this free speech issue within the UK. What's it like, because now you're living there, what's it like as you look at what's going on back here in the UK?
Oh, the UK has a terrible reputation in America at the moment. It's seen as just out of control, close to chaos. But their first experience of the UK was to see a comedy writer arrested for tweeting. You know, and if Starmer thinks that that's a good message to be sending out in the world, out to the world, he's even more in an echo chamber than I thought he was.
Are you surprised by the reaction? Is the silver lining that people might actually start waking up to arguably this threat to free speech in this country?
Yeah, but you know, I mean, I know GB News and other kind of, let's say, conservative outlets think free speech is the big aspect of this, but it really isn't. It's women's rights. You know, women are losing their single-sex spaces, they're losing their safety, they're losing their ability to speak. I believe there's a lot more people who agree with me than we think, and the reason that we don't see that support is because people are terrified. They're terrified of the police. Yeah,
well, but you also had like Malcolm Gladwell spoke this week, and he basically said, yes, I did think that men shouldn't be in women's sports, but I was afraid. And I think that's why it does come back to this fear, and it does come back to free speech, because if we had real free speech, perhaps this issue would have been addressed earlier.
But my point is, can you think of anything that it is dangerous to speak about than women's rights? Women's rights should not be dangerous to speak about. Do you know what I mean? I would understand if it was something to do with, right, even Palestine, right? But on women's rights, it's so basic. It's such a basic thing. Women fought for single-sex spaces over 100 years ago, and for over the last 10 years, they were basically dismantled by stealth. You know, so I just think that like it's not so much a free speech issue. It's more like, will you stand up for your wife? Will you stand up for your mum and for your daughter and your sister? Will you stand up for them, you know? And so, yeah.
But do you think it is changing? Because it feels like, you know, obviously you have the Supreme Court's decision, and now that's being backed up. And they're going to have to basically implement it now.
No, I'll tell you why.
Human Rights Commission.
I'll tell you why. I mean, you've seen what's happened since the Supreme Court decision. A lot of people don't even know the Supreme Court decision happened. One of the problems with trans rights activism is that whenever people talk about it, the language is so unclear and obscure and obtuse that people are never on steady ground when they're talking about it. Like trans people. What does that mean? What does it mean? No one knows. I've never heard the same definition of trans people twice, you know? And the only definition you can get is the one this dizzy policeman told me, which was, you know, it's a person who feels this and that. How can you base law on a feeling, on a subjective feeling? How can you? You can't. But the police are trying. And as a result, a lot of decent women have been thrown in jail cells. This is, you know, it's not just me who's suffering from this kind of overreach. More importantly, it's ordinary people who do not have the backing of the Free Speech Union, who do not have the backing of all the people I've made friends with over the last few years. They're isolated. They don't know what their rights are. They're confused by the issue, and then the police swoop, you know.
Do you think that the UK is on a dark path? Do you think that it can be redeemed, or what do you think the future holds for us? Because again, you've moved to America now. I guess in some ways you can see what's going on from afar.
I'm very worried. I think that we're moving from, over the last few years, you've seen the police being used more for crowd control than anything else, you know, more for trying to keep people from, I mean, you know, you see things like, there was at Surrey Pride, someone had a poster that said, there's no pride in paedophilia, you know, which was a reference to Stephen Ireland. And the police approached them and said that might be offensive and forced them to take it down, you know. So if you cannot say that paedophilia is wrong, what good are the police? They might as well disband them, you know.
What's happening to you now then after this? Are you going back to America?
Yeah, going back as soon as I can. Gonna have a little rest because I'm a little exhausted after everything. And then, you know, I'm going back. I'm working on 2 film ideas. One, we've written one sitcom. So I'll see how I do with that, you know.
And then will you be
The police did me 2 favors, though. I must say this before we go. They made me famous in America, and they got me to check my blood pressure. So in the end, I do have to thank those officers.
So I imagine when you come back in a few months that you're hoping that they're not going to be greeting you at the airport.
Yeah.
Good luck. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in.
Really appreciate it, Josh. Good to see you.
You too.